Hello and welcome to the Indy Author podcast. Today, my guest is Lisa Regan. Hey, Lisa, how are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I am doing great. And to give our listeners and viewers a little bit of background on you, Lisa Regan is the USA Today and Wall Street Journal bestselling author of the Detective Josie Quinn series, as well as several other crime fiction titles. She's an International Thriller Writers Award nominee, and her novels have been translated into over a dozen foreign languages. She lives outside of Philadelphia with her husband, her daughter, and her Boston Terrier named Mr. Phillip, who has his own very enthusiastic following on social media. And Lisa's been on the podcast twice before, once in episode 182, How to Succeed with a Super Long Series, and once way back in episode 16, we're really going into the Wayback Machine there, Drawing Back the Publishing Curtain, which I really liked because you brought some really great observations about both traditional and indie publishing, both of which you have experience with, the pros and cons of each. So I think that's still really a great episode for people to revisit. And if you're interested in those, you can find those at theindyauthor.com/episodes-all. And then you can search for Lisa Regan's name. So I invited Lisa back to the podcast to talk about something that I think is going to be very interesting to both writers and readers, regardless of your genre. And that is resources that are available to non-law enforcement authors to learn about police procedure. I think police procedure, as evidenced by the popularity of all the police procedurals on TV and book series, is just generally fascinating to people. So my first question for you is, which came first, your interest in police procedure or the books based on police procedure?
I think the books came first. That was the kind of thing that I enjoyed reading about a lot. And it's kind of the genre that I was always drawn back to. And so it was kind of a natural progression for me to start writing those. I never sat down with the intention to write police procedurals. I just wanted to write fun and thrilling mysteries with a really cool protagonist. And with the Josie Quinn series, it's turned into police procedurals, totally.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know you and I talk sometimes about your plots and how often something that seems like on the surface a very cool idea is not workable because it's something that doesn't really comply with the rules that Josie would need to be following.
Absolutely. A lot of fun things that I plan to do have been torpedoed by that very fact. And I found that some authors can get away with kind of throwing the rule book out the window and doing whatever they want, or making things maybe half authentic and the other half not. But my readers hold me to a pretty high standard, which is fine with me. It's the research is a lot of fun. So I try to make with my series everything as authentic and accurate as possible as fiction allows.
Yeah, I think that if you start out and you have a rule breaker, then that's okay. But you have to start out with that from the beginning. And then at some point, you just have to face the fact that they will have broken enough rules that now they're not going to be on the police force anymore. And so
Yes,
maybe your rule breaker moves from being a police officer, a detective, or whatever to being a private detective or something like that. But it's not
yes,
something that I think you can just introduce sort of conveniently when you think when an author thinks that would be a fun path to follow, but the
exactly,
rule books
exactly.
aren't suggesting that. Yeah. So I think that one of the tricks of this is that there must be tons and tons of information out there, but is it accurate? Like I would think there'd probably be a lot of questionable information out there. So when you're first diving into something, like you're working on a plot element and you wonder if you can do something, where do you go online, first of all, to sort of start your research into these things?
The first thing that I do generally is literally just an internet search. So if there's something I want to incorporate, or if there's something very specific procedural wise that I want to use, I will just type that into Google or Bing and see what comes up. And then kind of sit through all the sources to see, where is this information coming from? Who is putting it out online? Is there anyone that I can contact to verify this? But in terms of accuracy, I thought this was really interesting. I took a seminar online with Robert Dugoni, who writes the Tracy Crosswhite series. And he said, when you're researching things, you know that it's time to stop when all the sources are saying the same things. And I had kind of found that to be the case on my own. I just hadn't ever articulated it that way, but it's true. I keep sifting through different sources, and what emerges over time is a pretty common, consistent answer to my question. And that's what I go with initially. I wouldn't use Wikipedia necessarily, or if I read something from there, I would cross check it among two other sources. But you do figure out which sites are reliable and which aren't. And a lot of that comes down to, again, where are they coming from? Who is putting this information out? And again, just verifying, confirming what they're putting out with additional sources to make sure they line up.
Yeah, I'm surprised at how many really interesting sources are out there. Like we're outside Philadelphia. There's this series that's being put in out, sort of a true crime lecture series, and they're bringing people in from the FBI and people who have done undercover work and things like that. And a lot of those things are open to the public. And if you're looking out for it, it's really a cool, fun way.
It
Even if
is
you're a reader, it's those talks are really fun to attend.
definitely, most definitely.
I think one of the things that's tricky is that you can't just look up one thing and find out, like, what would the procedure be in the circumstance. It's really dependent on the circumstances and the setting and the time frame and the location and things like that. So can you talk a little bit about things you found where what you have discovered that might be true in one setting, one state, let's say, is not necessarily generalizable to other settings or states?
Well, I should say, as a general rule, that whenever you start researching any kind of police procedural or investigative techniques or laws, that you've made a great point. They're very different in different jurisdictions. So first of all, there's a hierarchy. You have the federal government, the FBI, and then you have each state has its own body that oversees certain things in that state. And then you get down to county and then boroughs, townships. And usually the larger cities have a different type of structure to their police departments and the way things work. So anytime that you are trying to write a story that is set in the world of, police procedure and investigators, the first thing you need to do is figure out where it's going to be set. And I would say broadly, if it's not a federal issue, then you need to look at what state. And every state has different training, different rules, different procedures, sometimes different laws. There is no national standard, from what I understand, for police training and police procedures. What they generally have is best practices. So, for example, when the police departments put out radio calls, when I was young, you could get a scanner and it was this like a physical box. It was very squawky and you could hear all of the police chatter on it. And now we live in the age of technology. All of that is computerized and online. And some departments will encrypt that completely. So you can't hear it all. Some departments only encrypt parts of it or certain types of calls. Some will put a delay on the radio calls. And every department does it differently. And I think Baltimore does what is considered the best practice in terms of encrypting, which is, I believe, you'd have to double check, but I believe it's putting a delay. I think it's a 15-second delay on their radio calls. So that's just an example, but you really have to look at whatever state that you're setting your story in. And then on a more granular level, each department in its own little pocket geographically will have different rules and different ways to go about things that are a little more flexible. Like there might be particular state rules that they have to follow, but smaller departments, they don't have necessarily the same budgets as larger departments. So those are the kinds of things where you'll see a difference. I would, from what I understand, the larger kind of urban departments will have the funds to maybe send their investigators out on different types of training that a smaller department that doesn't see a lot of violent crime would probably not need and would not devote a lot of budget to. So you just want to think about, is this a federal jurisdiction, in which case you're just following federal rules? It gives you a little more freedom in terms of which state, although you should probably research, is there any interaction or overlap, state laws, federal. But then if it's not a federal issue, you look at what state that you're setting it in. And even if you're making it up, the department that you're writing about, which I have done, it helps to model it after a particular department or a couple of the police departments where you have contacts so that it's all still within the realm of possibility for that state.
Yeah, I like that idea of modeling it on something because if you have a very long series, as you do with the Josie Quinn series, then I think it helps to not have to build that world from the ground up. And you can say,
Right.
oh, I'm going to model my department on the State College, Pennsylvania department or whatever it is. And then you can always go back to there and you have a set of policies that are, 99% support your storyline. And then when you have to make an exception, it's easier to check back through and see if you're violating a rule that you set up earlier in the world rather than every single thing being something you have to develop right from scratch.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I know one thing that I was surprised was not standardized is I was working on a standalone and it had a part where somebody overhears a police radio call and because of a misunderstanding about what the code means, like the 1725 or whatever, they think it's something that it's not. And I always just assumed those were all standardized. And then I started researching them. Like, no, they're kind of department by department, which is both I mean, in a way, it kind of makes it easier because if someone says, "Oh, that's not what that means," you can say, "Well, in some parts of the country, it is what it means.
Yeah, exactly.
In my part of the country, that's what it means." How about circumstances not only based on location, but like jurisdiction? I think that there's this question both of like in the same physical location, the jurisdiction across different agencies, and then there's the geographical distinction of like the crime happened here, but the suspect lives here. How do you navigate those kind of considerations?
Usually with a lot of consultation with people who are in the field or have recently been in the field, that is very tricky. A lot of times when I'm setting up a scenario, I will we can use the example you just gave, which is the suspect or the victim even lives in this town, but the crime itself happened in this different town or city. And there are times when I say, I think I know the answer to this, but I'm really not sure. And it's, at least as far as I've found, it's where the crime was committed who has primary jurisdiction. But then there are cases in which the state police will either need to take over or are required to take over or can be called in for assistance. And the same goes for the FBI. There are times when local departments are able to call them and ask for assistance. And this is also something I found out while I was writing book 6, the premise of which is a 7-year-old girl goes missing from the city park, that the FBI has it's called CARD, CARD, Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team. And they are there for any child under the age of 12 who is suspected to have been abducted. And they have units all over the country in different areas, and they can be called on. And I could be wrong, but I think they may actually be able to just show up and offer assistance, but they can come to whatever department has primary jurisdiction and offer them assistance. And they have usually a lot more resources and they can bring those mobily to offer to local departments. So there's a lot of different scenarios and situations in which agencies would overlap, whether willingly or unwillingly. And then there's always, in every state really is different, the hierarchy of things. So, for example, here you have your local department And then the county has the sheriff's office. And then you have the state police. And they all do different things. And what the sheriff does here in Pennsylvania is not necessarily what a sheriff's office in other states is responsible for. So that's always something that you need to check. Is the agency that I'm writing about it, is this correct? Is it a sheriff or is it something else?
Yeah, every once in a while, I'll talk to one of the couple of law enforcement experts that I've gathered, and they'll say, "Oh, well, I can't comment on that because that's not really in my area." And I'll think, "Well, but like you're a cop or you're a detective or you're a whatever, or you're an investigator." But then I realize as they talk why they're saying they can't comment because of those changes from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, from setting to setting that you're talking about. One of the things that your conversation about card reminded me of was this idea of what the rise in technology means for crime writers. And so what popped into my head is that Route 202 is a highway near both of us. And they have those big signs that they can program with different messages. And sometimes there'll be the missing person, and here's the, a gray Toyota with this license plate and things like that. And when those kinds of things come into play, it gives you an entirely different set of rules to play by. And I know the thing that really struck me is that I have a friend. Fortunately, I have a friend who works at the Coatesville, Pennsylvania Police Department. He used to work with me back when I was in my corporate job. And he's very good natured about answering my questions about police procedure. And he was talking about license plate readers.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so the properly equipped police cars are driving around and they're automatically reading license plates of the cars they're going by, and so it would alert them, I imagine, if it was on a watch list of some
Right.
sort. And I was like, in some cases, that's fun. In some cases, that's just a real pain in the butt because
Yes.
if you need to have somebody get away and there's all this technology, doorbell cameras and all this
Right.
other stuff. So what are some of the challenges you found that technology is placing on you as a crime fiction writer, and how are you dealing with that?
It is very tough out there. Honestly, in real life, I don't understand how anyone commits a crime and gets away with it. I really don't.
Yeah.
Even knowing everything I know from years of research, if I had to plan a crime, I still am like, it's too much. It's overwhelming. I know I'm going to forget some things. Yeah. So I think the biggest thing is phones and smart devices because like license plate readers, I have that problem too. And then one of my consultants said, hey, in a smaller department, not every vehicle might be equipped with them. Maybe you have three vehicles that kind of roam around your jurisdiction because they can't afford to outfit the entire fleet with LPRs. So the budget thing is really helpful for me to kind of pick and choose what I can take out because otherwise the book doesn't work. But smartphones, tablets, the infotainment stations, or the GPS, the things they put in the console of your car now, it used to be that only some of them had it. And then it was, oh, most of them have it. But now it's really hard to find a car that doesn't have some kind of computerized system pre-installed that you can't really turn off. And even if you think that you have, it's still trackable. Almost, it's just everything is trackable in some way or another. And even I've really gone down the rabbit hole a lot with this where I'm like, how can I make it so this person's phone is 100% not trackable, or the information that they are putting on the phone or the text messages that they're exchanging or the social media posts that they are posting or the messages through those apps. How can I make this so none of that is trackable or traceable by police? And oh, there is always a way. There really
Yeah.
is always a way to do it. And it's maddening. I mean, it's great if you want to solve crime. And, knowing the stuff that I've learned from law enforcement and my research, sometimes I see a news story and I'm like, "Oh, I wonder if they tried this." And again, it comes down to what resources that department had and their budget and their manpower and that sort of thing. And it also comes down to whether or not they can get warrants for certain things.
Well, on the point of cell phones, I remember this was years ago, but I suspect it's kind of still true, talking to Bruce Robert Coffin, who writes crime and detective fiction based in Maine. And he was saying that somebody had been giving him a hard time. He had said, like, his character drove into this part of Maine and they lost their cell signal. And the person didn't believe that it was possible to lose a cell signal. And he was like, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I can, like, I'll record my
Yes.
phone as the
Yeah.
bar stopped dropping out. And that idea that it really makes it a moment in time. There's going to be this period of time where most of the places you are in, let's say the US, you'll have a cell signal, but legitimately you don't in other places. And then 5 years later, you will have a cell
Yes.
signal. And then does that make that story sound dated because it's reliant on the idea that the person didn't have a cell signal in that location?
Yeah, and that's a scary thought. I haven't even had that thought, which now is terrifying. The date. But it's quite true. I mean, and you if you read older books in the crime fiction genre, I don't really have any difficulty if I know when it was published. If it was published in the 80s, I just have there's this expectation that they're just not gonna have what we have now. But I have had that experience like Bruce had, where I was in a town called Renovo, in Pennsylvania, where my dad and mom had a thrift store and a home for a lot of years. And after my dad passed away, my brothers and my mom and I had gone there to clean out the store. And the whole time I was there, I could not get cell service. And there was this one corner on the second floor of the building. If you went all the way to the front and you held your cell phone up toward the ceiling, you could get a bar. And sometimes you could make a call, but it would drop. And I thought to myself, well, I lived this experience, so no problem putting this in a book, none. And I got a bunch of emails when I put it in there from people who are like, that's just not possible.
Yeah.
Surveillance cameras where I live, which is outside of Philadelphia, not many people use them because the crime rate is pretty low here. And they use security systems. All the houses seem to have those, but I don't see a lot of cameras that are very obvious. Like there's not a lot of ring cameras and that sort of thing. And I wrote a story. But one of the books I wrote had like a street or a development in it where not a lot of people had surveillance cameras. And of course, a person from an urban area in California was like, that's impossible. There's no way that not every single house had surveillance.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, but not every place is the same. Not every
Yeah.
place needs them. So it's a little maddening sometimes.
Well, I do feel like there are two routes to take. One is I keep imagining that there's going to be this burgeoning trend of books that may be written now but are set in like the 80s,
Yes. Oh,
just
it's
to
so
avoid this
much
exact
easier.
circumstance. And also the idea of working that technology into the story, like not trying to fight against it, but going with it. And I know one really chilling story I remember reading. This is a true story of murder victim who's they were able to ascertain the exact moment of the person's death because they were wearing a heart tracking, like a
Yeah.
watch or something like that. And they could see
Yes.
when that had happened. And someone who can use the technology in a way to support their story and not try to circumvent it has some things to tap into that could be great for crime fiction.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've talked a couple of times about finding the experts. So when you were just starting out and you were establishing the pool of people that were going to become your subject matter experts, how did you go about doing that?
Well, I started in my own circle, in my own network of people that I knew, which I think is the best place to start. I was fortunate that one of the people I went to grade school with, actually, Jason J, he was reading my books. I didn't even realize it. And he contacted me about them and said, hey, I really enjoyed them. And hey, by the way, I'm in law enforcement if you ever need help. And poor Jason,
Eh,
all these years
little
later,
did
and
he
I'm
know.
peppering him with questions in the middle of the night. So that was really good for me. But typically, if I have a question about something, I will start with my inner circle, family, friends, other authors, and see if anyone can come up with a person who is working in the field that I'm interested in or knows specifically what I'm looking for and ask them to get me in touch with that person. So that's like my first stab at it. And then sometimes I will just use social media because my friends and acquaintances, there's a lot more of them, say, on my Facebook list than on my phone. So I will just put out a general call and say, "Hey, does anyone know anyone who works in corrections that I could talk to?" And I usually will get a lot of responses no matter what the subject matter is. And then if I can't find anyone that way, I will start just kind of Googling, or if it's a book that I've read by someone well established in that field, I will contact them. And so there actually is a lot of cold calling, as they used to say, where I just and I usually email, and I'll just email and say, "Hey, you don't know me, but will you talk to me anyway?" And that's kind of how I approach it.
Do you find it's easier to, or is it easy to get them on a call with you? Or do you usually start out asking for the information via email and then you move to like a Zoom call or something like that if it seems appropriate?
It depends on how much information I need and how elaborate it is. If it's something very simple, like, can you get a warrant for a specific thing in this one very specific scenario, then email is fine. If it's something minor and small that I'm not going to have to pepper you with questions about later when I actually start writing the scene. And I try to keep it to that because I don't want to take up too much of people's time or they won't keep talking to me. So but if it's something more elaborate, if I have a lot of questions, if I think that it's something that as I receive information, I'm going to have more questions, then I will say to them, if you are willing to give me your time, I will do whatever is most convenient for you. If that means a telephone call, a Zoom call, if they're local, I will offer to come to them. So it really just depends on what I'm trying to write about. And always in my initial contact with them, I will tell them exactly what I am looking for because I that usually makes it easier for them, one, to decide if they want to talk to me or not, and two, in what format. And it just saves a lot of time.
Yeah, it makes me think of two pieces of advice that I'm sure I've shared before, but it's worth repeating is one is check to see if the experts already have resources out there. In this case, I'm thinking of Jerry Williams, who's been a guest on
Yes,
the podcast a couple of times. She has the FBI Case File Review podcast.
she's the
And
best.
so,
Yeah.
former FBI agent, she gets all the questions
Yeah.
about the FBI. And most of the time, she can say, "Oh, if you want to know about money laundering, look at these 3 episodes. If you're looking
Yeah,
about this other thing, look at these 3 episodes." And people behoove themselves to look at those resources first, so you're not
definitely.
pestering someone who's already provided the information you're looking for in another format.
Yes, absolutely.
And then I'm also going to pass on a plea from my friend Chris Grawl, who I've used several times as an advisor. He has a service called Tactiquil, which advises authors on topics related to firearms. And his pet peeve is when people don't give him the whole context of the question when they ask it. Like the example he uses was somebody who was asking him all these questions, and then it eventually became apparent that she needed to have a gun that fired underwater. And he was like,
Oh,
"Well,
okay.
if you told me that to begin with, you focused my attention."
Yes.
So make sure you like, I think it's a tricky balance to say, give the person enough context so they understand actually what your question is, but don't give them like, please read these 3 paragraphs and then tell me
Oh,
what gun the person should be carrying.
yes, absolutely. It's hard to pare it down,
Yeah.
but always think it's best to give as much information about what you need to know as possible while also being as brief as you can.
Yeah. Well, I remember I like telling the story that the one thing I wasn't able to get from Jerry's podcast is I needed like 3 sentences to describe what a person would encounter if they went into the FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., and went from wherever you walk in the door to wherever you get to someone and you say, like, I'm here to see whoever. We
Yeah.
must have gone back and forth like 4 times. Because I would say, how about this? And she was like, okay, but there would be like a glass panel there. I was like, okay, how about this? She was very good natured about it. But those were like 4 important sentences, and I want to make sure that I got them right. And then I think the last thing I always like to say is there are the people who are subject matter experts and they can give you the fact that you need to know. And then there are the people who are more like collaborators because they understand the needs of crime fiction. And I
Yes.
always value the people who, like my friend in the Coatesville Police Department is exactly like this. I'll say, "Would there be a circumstance where this would happen?" And he'll say, "Well, not normally, but if you
Yes.
could make that work this way." And
Yeah.
those people are worth their weight in gold because they both bring the expertise, but they also understand that if all you're doing is writing about people following procedure to the letter, it's
Yes.
probably not going to be that riveting.
Yeah, there have to be some allowances made for
Yeah.
entertainment's sake. And I've been very lucky, like I said, with Jason. And I have another consultant, Stephanie Kelly, who was a detective for 30 years. And they are very understanding and patient and generous with their time and insight when I say to them, listen, I know this is going to sound ridiculous, but is there any way for me to make this happen? And they never balk or judge me. They just say, "Let me think it over and we'll see."
Yeah, I think that for authors, it's the difference between accommodating the outlier and pretending like the outlier is normal. And so if you have the detective who's the lawbreaker or the rule breaker, then the rule breaking can be like a focus of the story as opposed
Yes.
to the detective who normally follows the rules, but just did this one story where it was inconvenient, they
Right.
didn't.
Yes.
And I think that's very frustrating for readers to have that kind of inconsistency in a character, inconsistency in motivations.
Definitely, definitely.
Yeah. How about forensic and medical components? I feel like that's a whole separate thing. Like there are law enforcement procedures, but then people have gotten so fascinated with crime scene evidence and things like that. How do you handle that in your books?
Well, it is shockingly the approaches are basically the same, and the forensic stuff really does go hand in hand with all of the procedure stuff. And most law enforcement agents or officers that I've spoken with, there is a very in-depth and very broad knowledge that they have of forensic things already. So you can get excellent information from just talking to someone, maybe at your local department or a detective from an urban department or pretty much at any law enforcement officers working in the field, they will know what's there, what's available to them. They'll often know, what the crime scene procedures will be. It's when you start to get into really specialized things where they may have to refer you to someone else. But like, for example, Jason, I had a question. It was in book 21. I had a question for him about when they it was about fingerprints, and so I believe the question was, when you're arrested, you're typically fingerprinted, and that's in APHIS, the system, and then sometimes at crime scenes, well, not sometimes, I'm pretty sure all the time, depending on the crime, they do elimination prints. So if a crime happens in someone's house and the evidence response team or forensic people come in and they take prints from all over the house, they will take prints from the occupants, from the people that live in the house, so they know which prints are from those people and which are unidentified that they maybe want to track down. And my question to him was, would those elimination prints be in APHIS permanently? And he went into this whole really quite fascinating thing about how latent fingerprint technicians are trained in their certifications and which ones would kind of take the elimination prints right at the scene and kind of informally, and which ones would have to take extra steps or need extra certifications. So, in those kinds of cases where it's maybe more specialized, then I would have to look for someone who's, an expert or has those certifications in those particular forensic matters. So, for example, blood spatter, that's very specialized, and that's something that I would have to find an expert in. Just really anything that is super specialized that maybe not every law enforcement officer would need to know, but someone who's studying this all the time
Yeah.
would just be able to rattle off facts right off the top of their heads.
Yeah. Yeah, the opposite of that I was thinking about is the circumstances where you yourself as the author can do the research, and it popped into my head because I was working on a book where I needed to have somebody make an untraceable call, so I thought, "Oh, she'll use a burner phone." And I was like, I don't really have a sense of
Yeah.
what the deal is with burner phones. And so I spent a long time. If this was one of the few things that honestly I couldn't get a grip on it, just reading online.
Yes.
I didn't have a sense of what they looked like. I didn't have a sense of how they worked.
Yes.
So I went to a Target and I bought a burner phone and I used cash because I wanted it to be like as much like the circumstances. This is someone who can't have her purchase of the burner phone traced.
Right.
It was actually trickier than I thought. Like, normally, you just have like, somebody goes into a convenience store, they buy a burner phone, and 30 seconds later, they're making a phone call. I'm
Right.
skeptical because, I got the burner phone, and the person at the store told me, I said, "Do I have to also buy, like, a card for the time or whatever?" I did what I was talking about.
Yeah.
And they said, "Oh, no, 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 you'll have everything there." And what I realized, I think, and still in the midst of this experiment, so nobody should do anything based on what I'm saying here, except that I think what he meant was that if I got the phone and then I activated it and I had my credit card and I put in the needed information, that would give me minutes. But I was like, I can't use a credit card.
Yes.
I need to do this in a way that doesn't involve a credit card.
Yes.
On one hand, that could be an annoyance. But on the other hand, the fact that maybe a character goes into the convenience store, they buy the burner phone, and then they find out they can't actually use it because they don't have a credit card could be a really interesting plot aspect,
Oh,
not in
definitely.
the story.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I thought was interesting is, honestly, from a distance, you would not be able to tell the difference between this burner phone and an iPhone. They look almost exactly the same. So there's a little learning I had. That's my learning so far about that. So I thought a fun way to wrap up would be to ask you, what is a thing or a couple of things that you have learned in your research about police procedure, medical components, forensic components that you found most surprising?
Well, let me start with the most recent book that I wrote called The Couple's Secret. And this kind of dovetails with things that are not necessarily police procedure. But in the book, the Denton Police Department finds a car submerged in the Susquehanna River. It's been there for many years. And so, in order to get a sense of how what would transpire after that and how would that be handled, I actually spoke to a gentleman named Doug Bishop from a nonprofit called United Search Corps. And he and his team travel all over the country and they locate submerged cars in an effort to find missing people. He's just incredible. And so I talked to him and I was just had no idea what was really went into that. I just thought, oh, a submerged car, it's the river, because my idea was that there was a drought and the water level went down. And so the car would be exposed. And I thought, oh, maybe just skeletons would just be sitting in the car. And Doug says, well, no, if the windows are open and it's been in there for many years, that up to, the dashboard even is just going to be filth and biofilm and dirt and mud. And yet you would have to sift through that somehow. And then I learned that they use, I believe it's called a rotator truck, which is like the mother of all tow trucks on steroids. Cut the cars out, and that when the vehicle is underwater, that buildup that's inside the car is like fine dust. It's easily disturbed and dispersed. And that the moment you bring the car up out of the water, it starts to harden. And if you don't process that right away, it will be like cement, and which makes it more difficult to get to the evidence or any remains. And the remains are often just in various layers of the buildup. So there's not an intact skeleton usually just sitting there.
Wow.
And so it was just nothing in the that I had envisioned. So it was really instructive to talk to someone who is living that experience all the time. He works with law enforcement agencies all the time. One of the other things that to this day fascinates me is I got to shadow Pennsylvania search and rescue dogs, Vicky and Paul Water, and they were amazing. They let me come out on a training day and they would do training exercises with their dogs. And one of the things they did was they had the intern who was with them go hide in a ravine, and then the dog had to find her. What was really interesting to me is that the dog just scented her from the door handle of the car. Because in TV and film, you need a piece of clothing that the person was wearing. No, you don't. I mean, the dog sniffed the door handle of the car, and 10 minutes later, we're racing through the forest after this dog, and it, there she was. I mean, went right to the intern. So that was really amazing to me. It was one of those little facts that you just would never know unless you spoke to someone who's just living that profession every single day.
Yeah, I'm going to mention there're gonna be a whole bunch of episodes that I point people to in my comments after this interview, but I will just mention here that episode 241 is mistakes writers make about working canines and how to avoid them with Kathleen Donnelly. So Kathleen talks about exactly the kind of thing you're talking about. And I think the really fun thing about that sort of thing, the person who does the diving for, to investigate the sunken cars or the canines, if you do that research early, I can imagine any one of those becoming the basis of a whole series of great stories. Like it would be super fun to have a protagonist who was the canine specialist, or super fun to have the protagonist who was the person, the diver who helped understand what was going on when cars were being recovered. So, yeah, there's just like a whole font of inspiration that you can find if you look into those real life circumstances.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. So cool. Well, Lisa, I always love talking to you. It's always so much fun. And please let everyone know where they can go to find out more about you and everything you do on.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I always love to chat with you. And I love your podcast. It's just an endless wealth of excellent information. I always
Thank you.
tell people, they ask me questions. I just say, go to the Indy Author podcast because there is an episode on this.
Excellent. Excellent. I love that. Thank you.
So you can find me at my website, www.lisaregan.com. And from there, there are links to social media and how to contact me and purchase links and all that good stuff.
Great. Thank you so much.